Well, alrighty then. So let's get into this, because this is where all the failure exists. It's purely on the air side, okay? So I've got some high pressure air. It's not pressurized just now, obviously, but I've got some high pressure air, and that's connected to my compressor over here, which is out of shot, but it connects here. So basically, I've got like an adapter here. It takes either, it's designed to take an 88 gram CO2 capsule. I've tried it with high pressure air. I've tried it with an 88 gram capsule. I've tried it with a 12 gram adapter unit, which is one of these. And you know, it does work. It works on the first magazine of a fresh 12 gram CO2 caplet, but on the second magazine it starts to fail. So I think it's an issue of pressure. I think it's a very particular gun. It's a finicky gun that only really works in its current configuration in a very narrow envelope of pressure and conditions, and that's not really good enough. In my opinion, it's not really good enough. So the air side, how does it work? Oh gosh, where to start? Well, let's start over here. So the air comes in here and then travels up along the top of the gun and drops down into the pressure chamber, which is here. This square block over here is actually the pin, what I'm going to call the pin carrier. What happens is when you cock the gun using the charging handle, which we're going to take out the way, put that over there, the pin carrier is racked back, this is where things, and is held on this sear. Remember when we said when we pulled the trigger, it actuated this part here, which lined the belt up with the barrel, and the barrel interface and our nipple, our wee nipple there, and also this comes down and pulls the nipple out. So what the trigger also does is it operates that sear, which allows this to slam forward into the back of this pressure chamber. What that in turn does, it taps a floating valve, which I've already removed, which is over here, and it allows the pressure. There's no other valves in here. This is live all the time and round in here. When it taps this, it shifts it forward, and I don't know if you can see that, but there's a wee aperture there. It just allows air, that just shifts forward on this spring, and it allows air to escape up the middle of this floating valve, which is hollow, which you can see there. So that wee aperture there, the air escapes up, out through the nipple, onto the back of the pellet, and out down the pellet, down the barrel there. As that's happening, air is also allowed to escape between here and the back assembly of the pressure chamber this way to recock the gun. This is supposed to shoot back forward all that air pressure that's in there. And on my gun, it's not doing that. It just doesn't do it. And I'll get to why I think that is. All of that is powered by this spring here. I suppose you might call that the gun's mainspring. And we're going to take all that out and let you see what's going on in here. Okay. So basically, what we'll do is we'll very carefully, because you don't want things flying off into the sunset, do you? So this just levers off, like so. Your shitey, low quality mainspring. That's what that is. So that sits there, that can go out of the way. And then this slides back entirely and comes out. Now you might not be able to see, but let me get my torch and I'm able to show you. If you look down into there, you might just see that wee black head. Can I call it a black head down in there? That's the firing pin, and it's that pin there that impacts on the back of the floating valve in the pressure chamber that actuates the gun firing, and I'll show you that in a minute. That's a fail point on these guns, although not on my one. That falls off. It's just pressed in there apparently. Mine is intact, but it does fall off. So we're going to put that here because that's kind of where that goes. And then what we're going to do is we're going to lever this off carefully. It just lifts out, and then we're going to take that off. Now, as you can see from that, I don't know, you can maybe zoom in using your own, or maybe actually I'll zoom in on in the edit if I can figure out how to do that. You've got these wee seals here. It does come off, it all comes apart, but I'm not gonna take it apart. You just pull it all apart. So far I've had this apart like about a dozen times and it's gone back together and not leaked here. This is all pretty decent. I think it seems to be okay. These are a standard size of seal, so finding replacements for these is quite easy to do. But this is actually, it's okay. It's this bit here, it's this bit here is the issue, and we're going to get right into that now. Right, so just to reiterate, so the pin carrier here, or the bolt, is powered by this spring, all sits in this groove here, and this, when this is charged by this spring, when you pull the trigger, is released by that sear. It slams forward. I say slams forward, that's a bit exuberant. It moves forward and it taps the rear of a floating valve in this pressure chamber here, and that sets the gun off. What we're going to do is we're going to take this apart now. So we're going to move these out of the way. And those two wee bits are actually, I've removed them already from the inside of here. So if you are aware of what goes on inside this and you think there's something missing or not, they're there. I just took them off because that's the problem that my gun has. So if we undo this, being very careful because it will spring off. So what we have here is the floating valve, which is this part of the gun here. Part of the pressure chamber assembly. This we're calling it a floating valve, and normally it sits on a nylon seal which is up against here, but I've taken it off. That's what these two things are. That's where my gun's failed. What happens is when the gun is fired, the pin taps that and it moves the floating valve. It taps it forward, and what happens is as it taps forward, that aperture there, which you can just about maybe see if I move my big fat fingers out of the way, that aperture that you can just see there is opened and air is allowed to escape forward out of the gun firing the pellet and back round the outside of this floating valve into here to recock the gun. Obviously the idea is that this just taps it and opens it momentarily and lets that pressurized air out to do what it needs to do. Mine doesn't really do that, and I'll explain why in a wee minute when we get onto why the gun fails. This spring as well is also wider at one end than at the other. You need to be mindful of that, because if you put it back in the wrong way around, it'll bugger things up for you. At the other end of the pressure chamber, there's another seal, if you like, that this sits up against, so that when it taps it, it shunts it forward so that the air just doesn't, escape out the front when it's sitting dormant. So that's how it works. I mean, it's quite simple, but it's one of these things where it's just not very well engineered. So as I say, this comes forward, the pin in there makes contact with air, taps it forward. There's no other mechanism here. It's not regulated, so this is always pressurized around the outside of that floating valve, and it's only when it's tapped that the pressure in here is allowed to escape, and it should go in two directions. It should go this way to fire the gun and that way to recock the gun. But sometimes it does and sometimes it doesn't. That's how it's supposed to work. So time to start talking about the gun's fail points. The things that go wrong with it, things that don't work well, things that are poorly engineered. Everything that is attached to the gun, to the casing here, is okay, with the possible exception of the barrel assembly here and these lugs which pull that nipple up against the belt, which is supposed to seal all this for when the gun fires. I don't think the seals here are particularly good, and I don't think these actually pull this nipple forward all the way. They're supposed to come down and grip onto this and pull it forward and out, so that the nipple there actually forms a seal with the belt, as we've talked about. So I don't think my gun's doing that. So I think I think the front surface might need built up a bit, so that's something that I'm going to try to make sure that there's a good seal with the barrel assembly here. My gun leaks from the back of the chamber. I've already taken this off. This is my fail point. This nylon washer sits in here. I'm not going to press that in, but it's pressed in here, and it sits flush. And this is what stops the air when the gun's dormant. When the gun's dormant, the floating valve sits up against this seal where it's supposed to, under the power of that spring. So that spring's tension, and it sits there. And obviously, when the gun's fired, it taps, and the whole thing moves forward, as already described. Unfortunately, when the gun's just sitting dormant, I think, well, there is air escaping out round here and out the back into the blowback mechanism, and it's just a steady hiss. It's not a massive leak, but it's enough. Obviously, that eventually, I'm on high pressure air, so it's not so bad. I can recharge that, but you'd go through a heck of a lot of CO2 capsules if you were using them. So that's, I think as well, generally, I think that affects the performance of the gun when it's shooting. I'll get to that in a wee second. So that's where mine is leaking. Other guns leak out the front of these because the materials is crap. I mean, I'm not an engineer, but I mean, it's just shonky material. It really is. It's wobbly, it's plasticky, it's poor quality. This black shroud does come off. It just holds the nipple in place. But honestly, if I can snap it off with my screwdriver, but it's so, if I snap that and I can't get another one, I don't think Sig, they're not doing spares. So yeah, I mean, if I break that, I don't even know how I would go about fixing that. So I'm not going to take that off. It does come off, and you can take the nipple out, and there's a wee spring in there, and there's another valve in there as well, which we've talked about, which this pushes up against, and it's supposed to be sealed, but sometimes it's not, sometimes it is. Not a massive issue though, to be fair, but because it's just air escaping a wee bit, but it does affect the action of this gun. The other thing that happens is that black thing you can see down there, that's the firing pin that taps in here. This falls out. Mine hasn't. I think maybe this is something that they fixed, maybe, hopefully, or improved, maybe not fixed, but mine's doesn't fall out. I know that I probably just broke that because I poked it with a screwdriver. Mine's doesn't fall out, hasn't fallen out yet. People just glue that back in. Other people just stick a screw in there and just screw it in tight. But mine so far is okay. I think this might be a later model. This gun doesn't have a forward assist, a fake forward assist. So I see older guns on YouTube do on the casings. So this one doesn't. So it might be a newer model. These seals can fail as well. There's a seal there, the wee seal, and also here, this assembly that you screw into is pretty poor. Yeah, I would be very careful about over tightening capsules or high pressure air. I'd be careful about, if you're using an adapter, like if you're using a 12-gram CO2 adapter, you'd be very careful about tightening this up and then screwing your actual adapter, the actual thing in, and because as you tighten that, it's tightening this, and you could over tighten it and it just cracks this. That's the thing. It's not happened with me, but I believe it goes on. As I say, my issue is what I'm going to call chatter. When I pull the trigger, the gun goes off, it fires the pellet out, but I believe the air that's supposed to escape out the back to recock the gun is going out the front. It's almost like, it sounds as if it's firing in automatic mode. It's the strangest thing. Obviously the belt isn't traveling, so it's not, it's only discharging air automatically. It's not actually firing pellets automatically. It's not that it's not that cool. But the point is when I pull the trigger, sometimes it fires twice, sometimes it fires 4 or 5 times, and if you're And I noticed it when I was outside. I was kind of had the gun pointed at the ground. I was pulling the trigger, and it was the way it would shoot 4 or 5 times, and you could see the air hitting the grass on the ground when it was doing it. And I think that it's this chattering. I think that when it taps it, the air that should go out the back of the gun to recock it is going out the front of the gun and firing again. And I can't really figure out why it's doing that. I think it might have something to do with this seal not being very good. I just don't know. You might think that it doesn't sit flush, but that edge there, that inside edge there, is recessed, and it actually sits over that pressed, that terrible quality pressed sort of fitting there. It actually sits over that. I don't know if you can see that, but you can see that it kind of, it's probably out of focus, but it does sit over that, so it should sit flush against that nylon washer. But for whatever reason, when I fire this gun, the air shoots out the front. It escapes out the front instead of recocking the gun. It all escapes out the front of the gun. So, and I think it might be because these lugs aren't pulling the nipple hard enough up against the belt, so there's just not enough back pressure to force the compressed air this way. It's allowing it all to go out this way because there's just nothing, I mean, I'm guessing, but there's just not enough back pressure to operate the blowback mechanism because there's too many leaks in this area of the gun. That's my working theory, and I'm obviously looking to replace that seal just to see if that's the case. And I'm going to build up the front edge of these lugs that grip onto the nipple and pull it forward so that it pulls it forward with a bit more tightly up against the barrel, up against the belt, and the belt in turn up against the barrel interface. I'm also going to have a look in here and see if I can get seals in there so that I don't know if anyone's got any suggestions about how I might do that. I'm thinking maybe flat rubber washers or something, but like super thin. I don't know. Anyway, I'm going to wrap up there because I think that covers everything that's going on with the gun and the operation. I'm just going to put it back together under the camera, and you can see how that. I might speed it up a bit because it's boring as hell. So I'm going to put the inners back together and let you see how that all works. Okay, so if you've got any questions, put them in the comments. I'll try and answer them. I'm not an engineer. I don't work for Sig. If I worked for Sig, I wouldn't put my name to this, but I probably would. It's a really good looking gun. It's a shame that it doesn't work better. There's a catch that sits on top of there. Just get that out. This sits like so. Oops, steady out. Sits something like that, just holds that in place. It's quite simple, really. I mean, there's a lot of moving parts, but that's the gist of it. Hope that helps.